The Vithrani Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. They had conquered 347 species across 3 galactic arms. Their method was simple and it always worked. They would arrive at a new world, send a single message, and watch the chaos unfold. The message was called the Declaration of Total War. It was not just words, it was a weapon. The broadcast would show images of burning cities, of species kneeling before Vithrani soldiers, of entire civilizations reduced to ash. The psychological effect was devastating. Most species surrendered within hours. Some lasted days. None had ever lasted longer than a week. High Commander Kethros stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. His scales were dark purple, almost black, and his eyes glowed with the confidence of a being who had never known defeat. Behind him, 300 warships waited in perfect formation at the edge of an unremarkable star system. The humans called their star Sol. They called their planet Earth. They were a young species, barely capable of traveling beyond their own moon. By Vithrani standards, they were primitive, weak, and utterly beneath notice. But the Dominion Council had ordered their conquest anyway. Earth sat at the intersection of 3 valuable trade routes. Its resources were modest but useful, and more importantly, no species in that sector had been reminded of Vithrani power in centuries. It was time to send a message. Kethros pressed a button on his command chair. Begin the declaration. The broadcast went out at the speed of light, amplified by technology that humans could not begin to understand. Every device on Earth that could receive a signal received it. Televisions, phones, computers, radios. Even some kitchen appliances with wireless connections suddenly displayed the face of High Commander Kethros. He spoke in the human language called English. The Vithrani had studied humanity for several months before arriving. They knew their languages, their history, their weaknesses. They knew everything they needed to know. Or so they thought. People of Earth, Kethros announced, his voice deep and menacing. I am High Commander Kethros of the Vithrani Dominion. Your world now belongs to us. You have 2 choices. Surrender immediately and serve the Dominion as a subject species, or resist and face complete annihilation. There will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy. This is total war. The broadcast showed images of previous conquests, cities burning, aliens screaming, soldiers marching through the ruins of civilizations that had dared to resist. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. It had broken the spirit of hundreds of species before. Kethros ended the transmission and leaned back in his chair. Now came his favorite part, the waiting. Within minutes, the humans would begin to panic. Their governments would collapse into chaos. Their people would turn on each other in fear. And then, when they were broken and desperate, the Vithrani would descend and claim their prize. His communication officer, a young female named Yelkith, monitored the human networks. Her job was to track the panic, to measure the fear, to report when the species was ready for conquest. 10 minutes passed. 20 minutes. An hour. Yelkith's crest, which normally stood tall and proud, began to flatten against her skull. She stared at her screens with growing confusion. High Commander, she said slowly, something is wrong. Kethros turned to her. Wrong, explain. The humans are responding to our declaration. Of course they are. They should be terrified. They are not terrified, sir. Yelkith's voice was barely a whisper. They are laughing. Kethros stood from his chair and walked to her station. He looked at the screens and could not understand what he was seeing. Human social networks were exploding with activity, but it was not panic. It was not fear. It was something else entirely. Someone had taken his image and added small, furry ears to his head. The caption read, "Angry Space Cat Wants Your Planet." It had been shared 4 million times in the last 30 minutes. Another human had edited his declaration speech to make it sound like a song. The rhythm was catchy. It was already being played on what humans called radio stations. A group called Reddit had created something called a megathread about the invasion. The top comment read, "Finally, something interesting is happening in 2026. It had received 47,000 approvals. "What is this?" Kethros demanded. "What are they doing?" "I believe they are making jokes, sir," Yelketh said. "About us, about the invasion, about everything." "That is impossible. We just threatened to destroy their entire civilization." "Yes, sir, and someone has already made a picture of you wearing a human garment called a tutu. It is being spread very quickly." Kethros felt something he had never felt before in his long career of conquest. Confusion. Complete and total confusion. On Earth, the reaction to the alien declaration was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. In New York City, a man named Dave watched the broadcast on his phone while waiting for a subway train. When it ended, he shrugged and said to the stranger next to him, "Well, that's gonna make the commute interesting." In Tokyo, a teenager named Yuki immediately began drawing the alien commander as an anime character. She posted it online within the hour. It went viral before dinner. In London, a pub filled with after-work drinkers watched the declaration on the television above the bar. When it ended, there was a moment of silence. Then someone raised their glass and shouted, "Finally, a proper challenge." The entire pub cheered. In Sydney, a grandmother named Margaret called her daughter to ask if the aliens would affect her garden. When told that the aliens had threatened total annihilation, Margaret replied, "Yes, dear, but will it rain tomorrow? I just planted tomatoes." World leaders held emergency meetings, but even they seemed more curious than afraid. The President of the United States addressed the nation with a speech that included the phrase, "We've been waiting for this moment," and a reference to something called Independence Day. By the time 6 hours had passed, the alien invasion was the #1 trending topic on every social media platform on Earth. But not because people were scared, because they were entertained. Someone created a website called Alien Invasion Bingo. It had squares like dramatic speech and threatens annihilation and weird-looking leader. Every square was already checked. A famous musician released a song called "Come and Get Us" that reached #1 in 37 countries within 4 hours. A group of humans in something called cosplay had already created costumes based on Vithrani armor. They were posting pictures online and asking if they were accurate. Back on the Eternal Dominion, High Commander Kethros stared at the data streams from Earth. His claws gripped the edge of Yelketh's console so hard that the metal began to bend. "This is not possible," he said quietly. "No species reacts this way. No species has ever reacted this way." Yelketh pulled up another screen. "Sir, their military forces are mobilizing." "Good, finally, a normal response." "Sir, they are mobilizing with enthusiasm. Their soldiers are posting messages online saying they are excited and ready for action." One general wrote that this is, and I quote, "the coolest thing to happen in his entire career." Kethros closed his eyes. In 12,000 years, the Vithrani had conquered species that fought back with desperate fury. They had conquered species that surrendered in trembling fear. They had conquered species that tried to negotiate, to bargain, to plead. They had never encountered a species that treated the end of their world as entertainment. "What are these creatures?" Kethros whispered. Nobody on the bridge had an answer. On Earth, the memes continued to spread. The jokes continued to flow. And somewhere in the chaos, humanity prepared for war the only way it knew how. With a smile, 3 days after the declaration, High Commander Kethros made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He sent an ambassador to Earth. The ambassador was Yelketh, his communications officer. She was young but intelligent, skilled in languages and cultural analysis. If anyone could understand these strange creatures, it would be her. Yelketh took a small shuttle down to the planet's surface. The humans had designated a meeting place in a city called Geneva. They said it was where they handled international matters. Yelketh did not understand why a single species needed so many different nations. But she added it to her growing list of confusing things about humanity. The shuttle landed on a wide field near a large building. Yelketh had expected soldiers. She had expected weapons pointed at her. She had expected fear. Instead, she found a crowd of humans standing behind a rope barrier, holding up small glowing rectangles and cheering. "They're taking pictures," her pilot said, sounding disturbed. "They're treating this like a celebration." Yelketh stepped out of the shuttle. The cheering grew louder. Someone in the crowd was holding a sign that read, "Welcome to Earth. Please don't eat us," with a small drawing of a smiling face. A human woman approached her. The woman had messy hair, tired eyes, and was wearing a wrinkled piece of clothing that Yelketh would later learn was called a blazer. She looked like she had not slept in days, but she was smiling. "Ambassador Yelketh," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Chen, United Nations liaison. Welcome to Earth. How was your flight? Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? We have snacks inside." Yelketh stared at the extended hand. She knew from her studies that this was a human greeting ritual. She reached out and grasped it. The human's hand was warm and soft. "I am here to discuss the terms of your surrender," Yelketh said. Sarah Chen laughed. It was not a nervous laugh or a scared laugh. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that came from true amusement. Right, the surrender thing. Let's talk about that inside. But first, seriously, coffee. It's really good. We're very proud of our coffee." Yelketh was led inside the building and into a large room filled with humans. They sat around a long table, representing different nations and organizations. There were military uniforms and business suits, and one man who appeared to be wearing what humans called jeans and a t-shirt. None of them looked afraid. A large man with dark skin and a shaved head stood to greet her. He introduced himself as General Marcus Thompson of the United States military. "Ambassador," he said, his voice deep and friendly. "It's an honor to meet you. I have to say, your ships are beautiful. The design is incredible. We've been analyzing them from our satellites. That curved hull structure, is that for atmospheric entry or just aesthetic choice?" Yelketh blinked. "You want to discuss our ship design?" "Well, sure. We're going to be fighting you soon. Might as well appreciate good engineering when we see it." He smiled broadly. "No hard feelings, of course. It's just war." The meeting that followed was unlike anything in Vithrani history. Yelketh attempted to explain the terms of surrender. The humans would become a subject species. They would provide resources and labor to the Dominion. Their leaders would be replaced with Vithrani governors. Resistance would be punished with death. The humans listened politely. Then they began asking questions. "So about these Vithrani governors," a woman from China asked. "Do they get paid? What's the salary like?" "The tax structure you mentioned," a man from Germany said. "Is that progressive or flat? We have economists who would love to see the details." "You said you've conquered 347 species," the man in jeans said. He had been introduced as a consultant, but Yelketh did not know what he was consulting about. "That's really impressive. Have you written any of that down? We would love to read about it. Maybe a documentary." Yelketh tried to steer the conversation back to the threat of annihilation. She pulled up footage on a holographic display. It showed Vithrani soldiers destroying a city on a planet called Kethver Prime. Buildings crumbled. Aliens screamed and fled. The humans watched in silence. Then General Thompson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Those plasma cannons," he said. "What's the rate of fire? And is there recoil compensation, or is it more of a brace-and-fire situation?" A younger officer next to him was taking notes. The explosion radius looks like maybe 30 meters. We could probably counter that with dispersed formations. The armor on those soldiers, another human said. It looks heavy. Does that slow them down? What's the mobility like in different terrain? Yelketh realized with growing horror that the humans were not watching the footage with fear. They were watching it like students watching a training video. They were learning, analyzing, planning. You should be terrified, Yelketh said, her voice rising. We have destroyed entire civilizations. We have ended species. Your world will burn if you do not surrender. Sarah Chen leaned forward. Her expression was still friendly, but there was something else in her eyes now, something that made Yelketh uncomfortable. Ambassador, Sarah said gently, I'm going to tell you something about humans. We've been killing each other for about 200,000 years. We've had 2 wars that involved almost every nation on this planet. We've invented weapons that can destroy entire cities in a single flash. We've fought over land, over resources, over ideas, over which version of the same God was correct. She gestured around the room at the representatives of different nations. Everyone in this room, our countries have been enemies at some point. Some of us were enemies just a few decades ago. We've burned each other's cities. We've done terrible things to each other. Yelketh did not understand where this was going. Sarah smiled. My point is, Ambassador, we're really good at war. We've had a lot of practice, and honestly, she leaned back in her chair, we've been getting a little bored fighting each other. You've given us something we haven't had in a long time. And what is that? Yelketh asked. A common enemy, General Thompson said. Someone everyone can agree to fight together. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get humans to agree on anything? But you just showed up and threatened all of us at once. He laughed. You've done what 100 years of diplomacy couldn't do. You've united the entire planet. A man from Russia spoke up. We've already begun sharing military secrets with each other, things we've hidden for decades, because of you. He raised a glass of water in a mock toast. Thank you for that. Yelketh felt dizzy. This was wrong. This was all wrong. Species were not supposed to react this way. They were supposed to crumble, to fracture, to tear themselves apart in fear. We're also very excited about the technology, a woman from Japan said. Your ships use some kind of faster-than-light travel, yes. We've been dreaming about that for over a century. Once we capture some of your ships, we'll finally be able to study it. Once you capture our ships, Yelketh repeated. Well, yes. That's usually how it works, isn't it? The woman smiled innocently. You come to conquer us, we fight back, we capture some of your equipment, we reverse engineer it. Standard process. General Thompson nodded. We're actually already placing bets on how long it'll take. The physics department at MIT says 6 months once we get our hands on a working engine. I think they're being optimistic, but they're very motivated. The meeting continued for another 3 hours. By the end, Yelketh had not secured a surrender. She had not even received a formal rejection of her terms. What she had received was an invitation to something called Comic-Con, where she was promised she would be an absolute celebrity, a list of questions from human scientists about Vithrani biology, and an offer to appear on something called a podcast. She also had 17 requests for her autograph. When Yelketh returned to the Eternal Dominion, she stood before High Commander Kethros in the main briefing room. Her scales had gone pale. Her crest was completely flat against her skull. Report, Kethros commanded. They are not going to surrender, sir. Then they will be destroyed. Sir, I do not think that will be as easy as we anticipated. Yelketh paused, trying to find the right words. They are not afraid of us. They are not even angry at us. They are delighted. They see this invasion as an opportunity for unity, for technology, for entertainment. Entertainment, Kethros repeated flatly. Yes, sir. One of their generals told me that we have done something their politicians have tried to do for a century. We have given them a reason to stop fighting each other. Yelkuth's voice was barely above a whisper. "They are thanking us, sir. They are genuinely thanking us for invading their planet." Kethros was silent for a long moment. "Then we will show them what real war looks like," he finally said. "Prepare the ground forces. If they want a fight, we will give them one." As Yelkuth left the briefing room, she could not shake the feeling that they were making a terrible mistake. The humans were strange. They were unpredictable. They were completely insane by any reasonable standard. And they were not afraid. That, more than anything else, terrified her. The first Vithrani ground assault targeted a small farming community in the American state of Kansas. It was a strategic choice. The area was isolated, poorly defended, and far from any major military base. It would be a quick victory, a demonstration of Vithrani power that would finally break the humans' strange confidence. 500 Vithrani soldiers descended from the sky in dropships. They were the elite of the Dominion military, veterans of dozens of planetary conquests. Their armor was thick and black, designed to inspire terror. Their weapons could punch through concrete walls. They moved in perfect formation, silent and deadly. They landed in a wheat field at dawn. The first thing they saw was a man sitting on the porch of a small wooden house about 100 meters away. He was old, with gray hair and weathered skin. He wore simple clothes and held a cup of something warm. Next to him was a long weapon that the Vithrani recognized as a primitive projectile launcher. The squad leader, a soldier named Vrechthos, approached with his weapon raised. "Human," he announced through his translator, "you are now a prisoner of the Vithrani Dominion. Surrender immediately." The old man took a sip from his cup and looked at the 500 soldiers standing in his field. "Name's Earl," he said calmly. "Earl Hutchins, you boys are in my wheat." Vrechthos was confused by this response. "Did you not hear me? You are a prisoner. Drop your weapon and surrender." "I heard you fine." Earl set down his cup and picked up his gun, but he did not point it at anyone. He just held it across his lap. "My wife is inside making breakfast. We've got eggs, bacon, and something she calls a casserole. You hungry?" "We are not here to eat," Vrechthos growled. "We are here to conquer." "Well, you're gonna have to do that on an empty stomach then. Suit yourself." Earl leaned back in his chair. "I should warn you, though. The neighbors called when they saw your ships landing. Folks around here are on their way. They're real curious about you." Vrechthos did not understand why this was supposed to be a warning. Curious civilians were not a threat. His soldiers could handle any resistance from farmers and peasants. He was wrong. The first pickup truck arrived 15 minutes later. Then another. Then a dozen more. Within an hour, the Vithrani soldiers found themselves surrounded not by a military force, but by what appeared to be an impromptu community gathering. Humans came with guns, yes, but they also came with folding chairs, coolers full of drinks and food. Children ran around playing games. Dogs barked excitedly. Someone had brought a portable music player, and old human songs were drifting across the wheat field. A woman approached Vrechthos carrying a plate covered in cloth. "Hey there, honey," she said cheerfully. "I'm Margaret, Earl's wife. I brought some biscuits for your boys. They look tired. Long trip from space." Vrechthos stared at her. "We are invaders. We are here to destroy your way of life." "That's nice, dear. You want butter with that." The situation was completely outside Vithrani tactical training. They had been prepared for screaming civilians, for desperate resistance, for the chaos of fear. They had not been prepared for hospitality. And then the actual resistance began. It did not come from the gathered farmers. It came from the horizon, where a cloud of dust was rising. Vehicles were approaching at high speed, not civilian trucks this time, but military machines. The humans had been preparing for this moment ever since the invasion was announced. Units had been moving into position for days. The first human military vehicle to arrive was a tank. It crashed through a fence at the edge of Earl's property and stopped about 50 meters from the Vithrani formation. The top hatch opened, and a young soldier stuck her head out. "Hey," she shouted, grinning widely. "Are we late? We drove as fast as we could. Please tell me you haven't started without us." More vehicles arrived. Soldiers poured out and began taking positions, but they did so with an energy that disturbed the Vithrani. They were laughing. They were shouting jokes to each other. One group was taking pictures with their communication devices. A helicopter appeared in the sky, then another, then a dozen more. They circled the area like predators, but the pilots were whooping with excitement over their radios. Vrechthos received a communication from High Commander Kethros in orbit. "What is happening down there? Why have you not established control?" "Sir," Vrechthos replied, his voice strained. "The humans are not behaving as expected. They appear to be enjoying this." "Enjoying it?" "Yes, sir. They are treating this like some kind of festival. I do not understand." "Then show them what war truly means. Open fire." Vrechthos gave the order. Vithrani weapons blazed, sending plasma bolts screaming across the field. The celebration ended instantly as humans dove for cover. The friendly atmosphere vanished. But it was not replaced by fear. It was replaced by excitement. Finally, a human soldier shouted as she returned fire with her rifle. "I was getting bored waiting." The battle that followed was chaos. Not the chaos of panic, but the chaos of competition. Human soldiers fought with a ferocity that shocked the Vithrani. They did not retreat when they should have. They did not break when their positions were overwhelmed. Instead, they regrouped, adapted, and counterattacked with terrifying speed. A young human male, barely more than a child by Vithrani standards, charged directly at a Vithrani position while screaming words that the translator could not interpret. Something about a person named Lear and a creature called Jenkins. The absurdity of a small, unarmored human running toward certain death confused the Vithrani soldiers so much that they hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, other humans flanked them. The Vithrani had better weapons. They had better armor. They had centuries more experience with warfare. None of it mattered. Because the humans did not fight the way other species fought. They did not form neat lines. They did not follow predictable patterns. They improvised. They took insane risks. They turned every disadvantage into an opportunity. One human soldier, pinned down behind a destroyed vehicle, began live-streaming the battle on a device strapped to his helmet. "Hey everyone," he shouted over the sound of plasma fire. "We're currently getting shot at by aliens. This is the coolest day of my life. Don't forget to like and subscribe." The feed went viral instantly. Within minutes, millions of humans around the world were watching the battle in real time. Comments flooded in, offering advice, encouragement, and jokes. The battle lasted 43 minutes. When it was over, the Vithrani had lost 60 soldiers. The humans had lost 12. More importantly, the Vithrani had been forced to retreat. For the first time in 12,000 years, Vithrani ground forces had failed to take their objective. News of the battle spread across Earth and through the Vithrani fleet. The humans celebrated it as a victory, which it was, but they celebrated it in ways that confused the Vithrani even more than their military tactics. Someone wrote a song about the battle within hours. It was catchy and disrespectful, and it made fun of the Vithrani soldiers. It was played on radio stations around the world. Earl Hutchins, the old farmer who had offered breakfast to the invaders, became a celebrity. He was interviewed on news programs. He told the story of offering casserole to the alien commander with the same calm tone he might use to describe a visit from his neighbors. "They seemed hungry," he said with a shrug. "It was just the polite thing to do." The human media called it the Battle of Earl's Farm. It would be remembered as the first human victory against the Vithrani Dominion, but more than that, it became a a symbol of humanity's strange, impossible attitude toward the invasion. Other species fought for survival. They fought with desperation, with fear, with the knowledge that failure meant extinction. Humans fought like they were having fun. Back on the Eternal Dominion, High Commander Kethros reviewed the battle footage with growing disbelief. He watched humans charge into certain death with smiles on their faces. He watched them joke with each other while plasma fire exploded around them. He watched them turn a military engagement into entertainment for their entire species. "This is not war," he said quietly. "I do not know what this is." His tactical advisor, an old veteran named Threkval, stood beside him. "Sir," Threkval said carefully, "I have fought in 47 campaigns. I have seen species fight to the last warrior. I have seen species surrender without firing a shot. I have never seen anything like this." "What are they?" Kethros asked. It was not really a question, it was a plea for understanding. Threkval was quiet for a moment. "They are predators, sir, but not like any predators we have encountered before. They do not hunt because they need to. They hunt because they enjoy it. And we," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "we have just made ourselves the most interesting prey they have ever found." Kethros closed his eyes. The war was only beginning, and already everything had gone wrong. On Earth, the celebrations continued. Videos from the battle were edited, remixed, and shared billions of times. New volunteers flooded military recruitment centers. Scientists worked around the clock to analyze captured Vithrani equipment. And somewhere in Kansas, Earl Hutchins sat on his rebuilt porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the sunset. "Interesting day," he said to his wife. "Yes, it was," Margaret agreed. "Do you think they'll come back?" Earl smiled. "I hope so. I still have leftover casserole." 6 months into the war, High Commander Kethros stood before a holographic display that showed the status of his invasion force. The numbers were impossible. They made no sense. And yet there they were, glowing red with failure. The Vithrani had started with 300 warships and 50,000 ground troops. They now had 212 ships and 31,000 troops. The losses were not from traditional combat. Most of them were from something far stranger. Defection. It had started small. A single Vithrani soldier who was captured during a raid had been treated well by the humans. Instead of torture or execution, he had been given food, medical care, and something called entertainment. When offered the chance to return to the fleet, he had refused. "They have something called pizza," he had explained in a message to his former unit. "I cannot go back to a life without pizza." The message was meant to be private. The humans had broadcast it to every Vithrani ship in the system. More defections followed. Soldiers who had been captured found themselves welcomed rather than imprisoned. Scientists who had been taken were invited to collaborate with human researchers. Pilots who had crashed on Earth were helped back to health and offered jobs. The humans had turned psychological warfare into something the Vithrani had never encountered. They did not try to break their enemies. They tried to befriend them. But the defections were only part of the problem. The bigger problem was what the humans were doing to the rest of the galaxy. Earth had something called the Internet. It was a network that connected all human communication devices together. When the Vithrani first discovered it, they had dismissed it as primitive and useless for military purposes. They had been catastrophically wrong. Humans used the Internet to share information instantly across their entire planet. But more than information, they shared stories, images, videos, entertainment. And now they were sharing all of these things with the rest of the galaxy. The Vithrani had not realized that their communication systems could be hacked. They had not imagined that a species as young as humanity could break through their encryption. But humans had done it in 3 weeks. Some human children had helped. They thought it was a game. Now, the subject species of the Vithrani Dominion were receiving human broadcasts. They were seeing the mighty Vithrani mocked. They were seeing their conquerors defeated. They were seeing something they had never seen before. Hoping. On a planet called Vrethkal, a species that had been enslaved for 2,000 years watched a human video that showed Vithrani soldiers running from a group of farmers with primitive weapons. The video had been edited to include music and humorous captions. The Vrethkalians did not understand the humor, but they understood the message. The Vithrani could be beaten. Rebellions began on 17 Dominion worlds within the same month. They were not well organized. They were not well armed, but they were inspired by something that had been stolen from them centuries ago, the belief that resistance was possible. Kethros received reports of these uprisings with growing desperation. He could not fight a war on two fronts. He could not maintain his invasion of Earth while his empire crumbled behind him. The Dominion Council sent him a furious message. "You were given the simplest assignment in Vithrani history," the council leader said, his face twisted with anger. "One primitive planet, one weak species. How have you failed so completely?" Kethros tried to explain. He described the humans' strange psychology. He detailed their impossible tactics. He reported on their use of something called memes as psychological weapons. The council did not understand. They thought he had gone mad. "They do not fear death," Kethros said, his voice hollow. "I have seen their soldiers sing songs as they charge into plasma fire. I have seen their civilians make jokes about annihilation. They have turned this war into entertainment for their entire species. They broadcast their battles like sporting events. They bet on outcomes. They create art about our defeats." He paused, struggling to find words that could make the council understand. "We have conquered species that fight to survive," he continued. "Species that are driven by fear or duty or necessity. But humans fight for something else. They fight because they enjoy it. Our invasion has made them happy. They are grateful to us for giving them something exciting to do." The council leader scoffed. "Then kill them until they stop enjoying it." "We have tried," Kethros replied. "It does not work. When we kill their soldiers, they make monuments to the dead and use them as motivation to fight harder. When we destroy their cities, they rebuild them while singing. When we capture their people, they escape and tell stories about their adventures that inspire others to fight." He looked directly at the holographic image of the council. "They are not a species that can be conquered by force. Force only makes them stronger. They feed on conflict. They were designed for it. Their entire history is a record of constant warfare among themselves. They have been preparing for something like us for their entire existence. They just did not know it until we arrived." The council was silent. "What do you recommend?" the council leader finally asked. Kethros had no answer. He had spent 6 months trying to understand humanity, and he was more confused now than when he started. While the Vithrani leadership debated their next move, humans continued to change the nature of the war. A Vithrani officer named Krelvos had been captured during a failed assault on a human city called Tokyo. He expected interrogation and death. Instead, he was taken to a facility where human scientists asked him polite questions about Vithrani technology. When he refused to answer, they did not torture him. They simply shrugged and offered him something called ramen. The ramen was extraordinary. Over the following weeks, Krelvos was treated not as a prisoner but as a guest. He was given comfortable quarters. He was allowed to communicate with his family through monitored channels. He was introduced to human culture through something called movies and video games. He learned that humans told stories about alien invasions all the time. They had hundreds of them. In some stories, aliens were villains. In others, they were heroes. In some, they were just neighbors trying to get along. "You have imagined beings like us your entire existence," Krelvos said to a human scientist one day. "Why?" The scientist, a young woman named Dr. Sarah Park, smiled. "Because we're lonely," she said simply. The universe is very big, and for a long time we thought we were alone in it. We dreamed of finding others out there. Even if those others wanted to kill us, at least it would mean we weren't alone anymore. But we came to conquer you, to enslave you. Yes, and that's unfortunate. We would have preferred friends, Dr. Park shrugged. But enemies are better than nothing, and who knows, maybe we can become friends later. Humans are good at that. We've turned enemies into allies before, many times. Krelvos thought about this for a long time. 2 months later, he appeared on a human broadcast. It was called a talk show. He sat on a comfortable chair across from a human host who asked him questions about Vithrani culture, food, and family life. The audience laughed at his attempts at humor. They applauded when he spoke about missing his children. The broadcast was seen by billions of humans. It was also seen by millions of Vithrani who had access to intercepted human signals. Krelvos had not revealed any military secrets. He had done something far more dangerous. He had shown that Vithrani and humans were not so different. He had made the enemy relatable. Morale among Vithrani forces dropped significantly after that broadcast. It was hard to hate a species that had made their captured officer into a minor celebrity. It was hard to fight a war against people who kept trying to make friends with you. High Commander Kethros watched the broadcast in his quarters aboard the Eternal Dominion. He watched his former officer laugh at human jokes. He watched the human audience cheer for a being who had, 6 months ago, been shooting at them. They are not fighting a war, Kethros said to himself. They are waging peace, and they are winning. He looked out the window at Earth, the small blue planet that had humiliated the greatest military force in galactic history. The Dominion Council had given him a choice: win the war or face execution for failure. But Kethros was beginning to understand that winning was not possible, not against these creatures, not against a species that had turned invasion into entertainment and captivity into cultural exchange. The humans were not afraid of losing. They were not even afraid of winning. They were just enjoying the game. And that made them the most dangerous enemy the Vithrani had ever faced. The war ended not with a surrender, but with an invitation. Earth's unified government, which had been operating out of a converted convention center in Geneva, sent a message to High Commander Kethros. The message was not a demand for withdrawal. It was not a threat of retaliation. It was something that confused the Vithrani command staff so completely that they had to read it several times. It was an invitation to a party. The humans called it VictoryCon. They described it as a celebration of peace, a cultural exchange event, and the largest gathering in human history. They promised food, music, entertainment, and something called a special ceremony for the Vithrani forces. "This is clearly a trap," Kethros said to his advisors. "Sir," Yelketh replied carefully. She had spent the most time interacting with humans over the past year and had developed a strange understanding of their behavior. "I do not believe it is a trap. I believe they are sincere. They are inviting us to celebrate our own defeat." "Yes, sir, that appears to be exactly what they are doing." Kethros did not understand. He would never understand. But the Dominion Council had sent new orders. The war was over. The rebellions across Vithrani space had grown too large to ignore. Resources were needed elsewhere. Earth was no longer worth the cost. The Vithrani were withdrawing, and somehow, impossibly, the humans wanted to throw them a party first. Kethros descended to Earth's surface with a small honor guard. He expected hostility. He expected hatred. For a year, his forces had tried to conquer this world. They had killed thousands of humans. They had destroyed cities. They had done terrible things. Instead, he found a crowd of millions. The gathering took place in a massive open area that the humans had constructed specifically for this event. Colorful tents stretched in every direction. Music played from 1,000 sources. The smell of cooking food filled the air. Children ran through the crowds, laughing and playing games. Many of them were wearing costumes. Kethros realized with a start that some of them were dressed as Vithrani soldiers, tiny humans in purple armor, running around and pretending to shoot each other with toy weapons. A human child approached him. She was small, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with curly brown hair and a gap-toothed smile. She was wearing a crude imitation of Vithrani armor made from painted cardboard. "Are you the alien boss?" she asked, looking up at him with wide eyes. Kethros had commanded fleets. He had destroyed worlds. He had never been more uncertain how to respond to anything in his entire life. "I am High Commander Kethros of the Vithrani Dominion," he said stiffly. "Cool." The child grabbed his claw and began pulling him toward a nearby tent. "Come on, my mom made cookies. You can try one. They're chocolate chip. Do you like chocolate?" Kethros was led through the crowd by a small human child, surrounded by his confused honor guard. People smiled at him as he passed. They waved. Some of them took pictures. One man gave him a thumbs up and shouted something encouraging. This was wrong. All of this was wrong. He had tried to conquer these people. They should hate him. The special ceremony took place on a large stage at the center of the gathering. Kethros was led to a position in front of thousands of humans. He saw faces he recognized from the war, soldiers who had fought against his forces, scientists who had studied his technology. Sarah Chen, the diplomat who had offered him coffee on the first day, stood near the front of the crowd. A microphone was placed in front of him. "Speech, speech," the crowd chanted. They were not angry, they were excited, anticipatory, as if he were a performer about to entertain them. Kethros stood in silence for a long moment. He looked out at the sea of human faces. He thought about everything that had happened in the past year. The memes, the jokes, the battles that felt more like sporting events than warfare, the defections, the rebellions, the complete collapse of everything the Vithrani Dominion had believed about conquest. "I do not understand you," he finally said, his voice amplified across the gathering. "I came to conquer your world, to destroy your civilization, to enslave your species. You should hate me. You should want revenge. Instead, you invite me to a celebration." The crowd was quiet now, listening. "We have conquered 347 species," Kethros continued. "None of them behaved as you have. They feared us. They hated us. They surrendered or fought until they were destroyed. But you," he trailed off, searching for words, "you laughed at us. You made jokes. You treated the end of your world as entertainment." He looked at Sarah Chen, who was smiling gently at him. "When we attacked your farms, your people offered us food. When we captured your soldiers, you made them into celebrities. When we tried to break your spirit, you made songs about our failures and broadcast them across the galaxy." The crowd remained silent, but Kethros could see that many of them were smiling. They knew what he was describing. They were proud of it. "Your species is insane," Kethros said. "By any reasonable definition, you are completely mad. You do not behave the way beings are supposed to behave. You do not think the way beings are supposed to think." He paused. "And because of that, you have done something that no other species in the history of the galaxy has ever done. You have defeated the Vithrani Dominion, not through superior weapons, not through greater numbers, through sheer, incomprehensible stubbornness and an absolute refusal to take anything seriously." A voice from the crowd shouted, "You're welcome." The crowd erupted into laughter. Even Kethros found himself making a sound that might have been amusement. Sarah Chen stepped onto the stage. She was still wearing a wrinkled blazer, still looking like she had not slept enough, still smiling that strange human smile. "Commander," she said warmly, "we don't hate you. We never hated you. You came from very far away and tried to take our stuff. That's not great behavior, but we understand it. Humans have been doing that to each other since the beginning of our existence." She gestured to the crowd around them. "The thing is, we're really good at forgiving old enemies. The The people you see here, their nations have been at war with each other dozens of times throughout history. We've burned each other's cities. We've done terrible things to each other. And then, eventually, we stopped. We became friends. We became family. She turned back to Kethros. We would like to be friends with the Vithrani. We would like to learn from you and maybe teach you some things in return, like how to make pizza, and how to tell jokes, and how to lose a war so badly that you end up gaining something better than victory. Kethros was quiet for a moment. And what would we gain? He asked. Sarah smiled. Come back in a few years and find out. The ceremony ended with music and celebration. Humans danced with Vithrani soldiers. Food was shared. Stories were exchanged. The little girl in the cardboard armor brought Kethros chocolate chip cookies, and he found that they were, indeed, quite good. 3 years later, the Vithrani Dominion officially dissolved. The rebellions had spread too far. The old systems of control had collapsed. In their place, a new coalition formed, built on principles of cooperation rather than conquest. Earth became the cultural center of this new galactic order, not through military might, but through something that other species had never encountered before, an endless, infectious enthusiasm for life. Humans spread across the stars, carrying their strange culture with them. They brought music and art and stories. They brought games and sports and competitions. They brought an attitude that confused and delighted every species they encountered. Kethros, the former high commander of the invasion fleet that had tried to conquer Earth, became a best-selling author. His book, Confessions of a Failed Conqueror, sold billions of copies across the galaxy. He appeared on human entertainment programs and gave speeches at universities. He was beloved for his dry humor and his honest bewilderment about human behavior. A journalist once asked him what he had learned from the war. Kethros considered the question for a long time. Around him, humans laughed and argued and celebrated, exactly as chaotic and confusing as the day he had first arrived. I learned, he said slowly, that the universe's most dangerous species is not the one that fights the hardest. It is the one that enjoys the fight. Humans do not fear death. They do not fear defeat. They fear only one thing. What is that? The journalist asked. Boredom. Kethros made the human gesture called a shrug. They fear having nothing interesting to do. We arrived and threatened to destroy their civilization, and they treated it as the most exciting thing that had happened in decades. They were grateful to us for making their lives more interesting. He paused, then added with what humans had taught him was called a smile. Also, their coffee is excellent. I was not prepared for the coffee. Somewhere in Kansas, on a farm that had become a historical landmark, Earl Hutchins sat on his porch and watched the sunset. His wife Margaret sat beside him, knitting quietly. A ship descended from the sky, smaller than the invasion fleet that had arrived years ago. It landed gently in the rebuilt wheat field. The door opened, and a familiar figure emerged. Kethros walked across the field and stopped at the edge of Earl's porch. You came back, Earl said, unsurprised. I did. Hungry. Always. Margaret stood up and headed inside. I'll warm up the casserole. Kethros climbed the porch steps and sat in the empty chair beside Earl. The two of them watched the stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, a galaxy was changing. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were learning to be free. Enemies were becoming friends. The old order was giving way to something new. All because humanity had refused to be afraid. It is strange, Kethros said quietly. We came to conquer your world and instead your world conquered us, but not through force, through. He struggled to find the word. Fun, Earl supplied. Yes, fun. You made conquest fun, so we stopped wanting to conquer. You made friendship fun, so we wanted to be friends instead. Kethros shook his head. It is very strange. Earl chuckled. That's just how we work. We're not the smartest or the strongest, but we know how to have a good time. Margaret returned with 2 plates of casserole and handed one to Kethros. "Welcome back to Earth," she said warmly. Kethros took a bite. The casserole was still the best thing he had ever tasted. "Thank you," he said. "It is good to be home." Above them, the stars shone down on a galaxy that would never be the same. Humanity had arrived on the cosmic stage, not as conquerors or victims, but as something far more terrifying. They had arrived as entertainers, as friends, as the species that turned everything, even war, into an opportunity to have a good time. The universe would never recover. And honestly, the universe was grateful for it.